This is the Doc and Krueger cast, the official podcast of Doc and Krueger Games. Season 1, Episode 2, Choosing a Setting in the Roll With It system. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Doc and Krueger cast. This is episode 2. Last episode, of course, we did our audio rulebook, which was very scripted. We were literally reading out of the book and kind of giving you an overview of the rules that way. Hopefully that's helpful to you. I think that we kind of figured that it's not going to be something where you like listen and memorize and know exactly how the system works, but more something that kind of gives you a feel for how things ought to work so that you can go back and look up details later.
Well, I wasn't supposed to memorize it before we did that?
No. In fact, we didn't even memorize it. We had to read the script. So Flawlessly. No, I'm sure there were flaws. But hey, we're amateurs. For these next few episodes, it's going to be a lot of sort of more free flow conversation. We're just sort of chatting about different topics related to the Roll With It system and how to play it.
Yeah, in a way, this is our first real episode.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 0, we talked about ourselves, and then, of course, the system. And now here we are talking about aspects of the system off the top of our heads.
Indeed. So this episode, we're focusing on choosing a setting. So this is when you're first starting up a game, you're trying to decide what sort of game you want to play. What's the location, the time, the genre, the tone, all this different stuff that's just going to determine how your story is going to go.
Yeah. Now, the rules say that this is a genre agnostic system. And what we mean by that is that you can play any, this is our guarantee, it's not a real guarantee, that you can play any genre you want and it will work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done a number of things to try to test that out, from it being, weird post-apocalyptic sci-fi all the way through to sort of, gritty mysteries to more standard types of things. And because it's not geared in a mechanical, success and failure of abilities like a traditional RPG would be, instead the mechanics reflect the narrative itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely open-ended. So you can have magic, not have magic, have technology, not have technology. And it just kind of works because what you're doing is you're telling a story. And fundamentally, that's kind of the same thing across all things, whether you're talking monomyth or other things.
Even if you're not talking structure, just simply the structure of a character, once something is confronted with obstacles and tries to overcome the obstacles on the way to achieving their goal.
Elegantly said.
And I think that because we have a scene-based system where you're trying to see what a character wants in a scene and then basically whether or not they get it, this is maybe oversimplifying it, doesn't necessarily cover every single thing that could happen in the system. But because we take that approach, whether or not you're able to successfully play a genre in the Roll With It system kind of depends on your knowledge of that genre and your ability to kind of make it work.
Yeah.
If you understand the conventions of a genre really well, and you understand kind of like what scenes tend to play out, what sort of characters there are, and how stories tend to develop in that genre, you can make it work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so with this idea that characters are products of their environment, we strongly recommend that whenever you sit down to play a game, that the very first thing you as a table decide that you want to do is to set up, a setting. Now, this may be a collaborative effort, or it may be something the GM has, really desperately wanted to bring into it. But maybe a word of caution is that this game is way more fun whenever you come up with a setting together and the GM doesn't railroad, whether that be the plot or the setting or the characters or the, whatever.
And you're also, of course, welcome bring in settings that already exist. So say like you want to do, sometimes the group might just agree that, hey, we want to take, as we've done actually, the show The Expanse or the book series The Expanse. We just basically want to play The Expanse.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe it's like, magical high school, or maybe you want to do, post-apocalyptic, or you've got a favorite video game, you wanted to do Fallout, something like that, just anything. And so that's half the fun of that. But, there are some, I guess, guidelines, I would say, for creating and choosing a setting in this world. So let's talk about those.
So as we've said, you're going to be choosing the genre. And a lot of times when you choose the genre, you're also sort of going to be choosing the tone. Or maybe you're saying you're putting your own little twist on it where it's like this genre we all know, but with a tone that might be different from what is typical. Now, of course, some genres have a little bit of a range anyway. And depending on how specifically you're getting into the genre, tone isn't necessarily implied. But say, for instance, if it's something like a noir murder mystery,
good example.
That's going to have like a very sort of gritty, very dark tone, and probably not very. There might be a little bit of comic relief here and there, but it's not going to be overall kind of like a happy, adventurous story, or maybe adventurous, but it's not going to be. It's going to be a grittier adventure. It's not
noir means black for a reason. So yes,
exactly. Whereas if it's something like. Maybe if you're choosing to play something a little bit more comedic, that kind of is going to inform your tone. And you want to make sure that everyone is on board with the sort of tone you want to play. Because while there's something to be said sometimes for a particular character being the comic relief or being the odd man out to sort of come in or to bring this element into it, if taken too far, and if the other players aren't really on board with that idea, it can really derail things quite a bit and kind of like ruin the experience.
Yeah.
You take a look at Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, how many people hate Jar Jar. Now, there's some people who are totally cool with that. If your group was cool with having Jar Jar in the party, then great. But if everyone at the table but the person playing Jar Jar doesn't want Jar Jar, they might be a little bit frustrated by that.
Jar Jarred
Yes.
out of the experience.
Yes. It's a rather jar-jarring experience.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that tone is incredibly important whenever you're setting a setting, and to understand, okay, guys, this is going to be a little bit dark and gritty, or this is going to be flippant and fun. This is going to be kind of wacky. Everybody understanding the range of that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be just married to a thing once you get into it. The truth is, if you look at, for example, Shakespeare, which would be a strange setting in and of itself, there are oftentimes very, very funny, comedic, extremely hilarious elements that juxtapose right up against really dark, deep drama. And some of the, I think, best dramas, on prime time are the ones that are doing that, where you can shift from that high comedy over then into the other. So understanding the range of the tone is important in the setting, and not, if it's one note, it may not be as interesting.
For sure. The other thing that the genre is probably going to determine is the structure of your episodes. So, for example, if you're using a genre that's traditionally more episodic, say like Monster of the Week sort of thing, or a lot of sort of like sitcoms where essentially there's not very much sort of change over time, you can have episodes that are kind of like self-contained stories. And not to say that you can't have self-contained stories in an episode of a more serialized genre or serialized series. But you might find that it sort of like works better to like kind of resolve things in an episode and then have a whole new little story arc in the next episode. Whereas something that's more serialized, dramas tend to do this more often. You're more often going to find that you have sort of like a maybe a cliffhanger at the end of an episode, or some sort of thread that is like left hanging at the end of the episode so you can pick it up in the next one.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if you're trying to do something like a Saturday morning cartoon, for example, then you might think in terms of who is the bad guy this week for this episode, and how are we going to defeat his nefarious plans for this one. But then the overall story arc, call it the B or the C story arc, might be a different thing. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about shows like Lost, but they were really quite revolutionary when they came out, because for the first time in a long time, we were seeing a continuation of an ongoing story. And it really takes the full 5-6 seasons to understand the full story arc of something like, say, Alias, which is Jennifer Garner at her best, I think. Honestly, I love that show because it was so spy, but also there was prophecy, and also there was magic, and there was these other things. So knowing sort of the rules of your world and what's going to be in it, I think is really, really important. And one of those rules, the first rule, if you will, is, okay, how quick are the resolutions going to happen? Mm-hmm. Is this a series about one monster And is that monster going to be defeatable in that first episode, or is this an ongoing thing? I think of Stranger Things, actually, as an example here. I love that setting, the 80s, the almost Cthulhian mythos, that kind of a thing. But when I sat down to watch that first season, I didn't know or understand that it wasn't going to be a Monster of the Week thing. I actually was picturing something more like Amazing Stories. And what I got was, no, you've got 8 episodes here before they find, the main character. Oh, okay. That changes everything for me. Now I can enjoy the slow form storytelling. And so that's important. What's the pacing of your story going to be when you're determining that setting? Is it rapid fire? Is it Monster of the Week? Is it, a slow drama? Is the major conflict going to be the same thing throughout the entire arc? Etc.
And we'll get more into setting and playing scenes later in the series, a few episodes from now. But
True.
It's also going to play into what is your intention for a scene? What is a scene deciding?
Exactly.
So that's definitely something we'll hit on more later.
Yeah. Not losing an arm is very different motivation than finding out what's going on in this scene, kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Which that brings us a little bit to, like, you can almost think of this as a rating system, perhaps. Basically making sure that you've spoken with everyone and they all agree on elements that they do want to have in the game, elements that they don't want to have in the game. And this is actually a couple of different points. So on the one hand, when you're agreeing upon a genre, you want to make sure that everyone's on board with it. Actually, a really fun thing we like to do is to have everyone sort of throw in, I want to play a game with this in it. So I think this one time as an example, we had someone throw out Heist. I think you threw out Heist, actually.
Yeah.
But then someone else wanted to have drift racing,
Yeah.
and that came up. And then there was like all these other things we sort of threw together, and each of our characters sort of reflected in particular one of those different aspects, and we all kind of like merged it together into something.
Right.
So that's one thing, is to make sure that everyone kind of like gets what they want out of the game.
Yes.
Or maybe things that they don't want out of the game. So for example, we don't want magic. No magic in this game, that sort of thing.
Right.
Or I'm cool with sci-fi, but I don't want hard sci-fi. They're looking for something more like, science fantasy.
I actually heard that prohibition on my last game that I ran. And it's funny because what we ended up with, I did that exact thing. It was, everybody at the table, give me one element that you want in this. And somebody said Asian influence, and someone said racing, and someone said magic. And then what it ended up actually feeling like was Big Trouble in Little China, if you're familiar with that old film, that old turkey. And it had that kind of cheesy, almost 80s vibe that was just so good, because everyone had a thing that they wanted and were kind of latching onto. And it had an X-Files-y kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, someone wanted a mystery of some sort.
Right.
And actually the Asian influence you mentioned was I forget the name off the top of my head, but it's like wushang or something like that. It's a style of wushu story that has like kind of a more supernatural, fantastic element to it. So, we had that element in there along with the mystery element, the X-Files mystery element specifically.
And we're not done with that campaign yet. I know what's going to happen next. And actually Chris does not at the time of recording. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, I think that going into the game, choosing a strong setting that everyone kind of gets is going to really help you in character creation. It's going to help you setting those first few scenes, because those can be critical. And it's also going to help the GM know what kind of story the players are really looking for. And I think that's big. It's super, super fun and actually really easy in the role with it to be able to collaboratively come up with something on the fly. And that's literally what we designed the system for, was this strong collaboration in setting and other things. But
and we won't say that you can't play something that's a little bit more defined, as we said.
Of course, yeah.
It tends to work best in our experience. We found if the GM has this sort of idea of like where we start and basically where we're going,
right,
and is willing to sort of like let things fluctuate in the middle,
right.
Having too tight a grip and roll with it isn't a great idea. You can make it work, especially if your group is sort of on board with it. Like if you play a lot of sort of traditional crunchy games where the GM is like really in charge of everything and the players are just in their world.
Yeah,
that can work and roll with it.
Well, and that brings up a really important point, and it's this: anything that has sort of the feel of a mystery about it in that there's a fundamental truth that needs to be solved, whether it is, who is Lord Voldemort or, who is the alphabet killer, right? If it's anything like that the GM has that knowledge, but the players do not, proviso from someone who's done this is to the GM, either know where you're going and where that's ending up and have that in hand from the beginning so that you can react to it so there aren't anachronisms. In other words, know how the mystery came about, know what the solution is before you start. Or stay open-ended enough, take copious notes, and react to the players so that when that moment of, is this the answer, comes, you can say sort of a yes, but, or a no, but, or that kind of a thing. And it works if you don't ever tell your secret. Where you're like, yeah, I was just totally making that up. I have no idea what, but because I think all GMs, at least all good GMs who come at it with a narrative approach, who don't have a session, a pre-planned session in front of them. They don't have a scenario in front of them, and they're playing by the scenario book, which is the traditional way to do it. And it can be a lot of fun too. But if you're not coming at it from that, then make sure that you are flexible enough to be able to react to what the players are saying. And maybe don't choose a mystery your first time out of the gate if that's something you're not comfortable doing. Mm-hmm. So that's my one proviso when choosing a setting is sort of beware of the but what about the Dark Lord moment? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, you guys tell me. And as long as everybody on the table is cool with that, that can be so much fun. Because collaboratively, we can really come up with great stories and great villains and these wonderful solutions to the mystery emergently.
And the other aspect of making sure that everyone at the table is kind of on board with what you're doing is sort of the content, in a sense, the rating of the show that you'd be making. This is something that's been discussed quite a bit in the role-playing games community, especially at things like conventions and stuff like that, when there's someone who comes in and maybe isn't comfortable with a certain sort of content. For instance, if someone doesn't want sexual content in the game, or if there are certain triggers for them that they want to have out of the game.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to know what those are. So either you ask people if they know anything in particular, or there's another really handy thing that I didn't come up with, and at the moment I forget who did, but something called the X card, which is basically you have I forget if it's one or more of these cards, but each player is kind of allowed to at any point, without explaining themselves or having to talk about why they don't want this thing in. If something comes up, they put down their X card. It lets the whole table know, okay, we need to move away from this.
Yeah.
It's a really nice sort of etiquette thing you can do.
Sure.
So whatever works for you and your group. Our group, we tend to we always have this one player who asks, is this PG-13 or R? And that informs a little bit what sort of content we will show in the in the course of the game, or which ones we kind of imply, kind of like the fade to black moment, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's been really helpful to make sure that everyone is kind of comfortable with what is happening.
Yeah, exactly. When the Black Hawk helicopters get blown up, are we going to see the parachute or not? Is my example. I love that example, because that right there changes it.
That takes it down to PG.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point. Is it kid friendly or not in that moment? And then you can extrapolate that. Are we going to have an implied love scene, or is it going to get a little more graphic? And
language, that sort of stuff.
Language is a huge one. Actually, there's a show about to come out at the time of recording called Bright. Will Smith thing. Everybody's excited about it. Who's going to be excited about it? It's got orcs. It's got elves, but it's LAPD or whatever. I watched the preview promo. The profanity literally just turned me off of the show. I'm not interested in that kind of a show. And so for me, the rating was a defining factor in that. I'm super interested in the setting. I may even run something in that, but whenever we do, it's not going to have that level of authenticity, shall we say.
I think it's called Shadowrun.
Yeah, Shadowrun. Yeah,
well, to be fair, Shadowrun is kind of near future, not
Yeah, that's that is, and but no, I'm interested in Bright. I'm interested in seeing where it goes. But I guess is the point, is that we wanted to create a narrative heavy system that would be, to use the phrase from the rules, genre agnostic,
setting agnostic.
That's what I said. Setting agnostic,
but genre agnostic too.
It works too. And I don't know. I haven't read the rules. Actually, I literally just read the rules aloud and recorded them. What else is there to say about choosing the setting?
I think just in summary that you want to make sure that everyone is involved in the process of choosing a setting. And even if that is simply just giving consent to the GM taking the reins, that's kind of the traditional way the GM comes in with the setting already built or the one they've designed. And that's totally valid. You can do that. You can have it be a little bit more improvisational, have people throw in and come up with something on the fly. I think that that's one of the great things about the system is the flexibility. So just get everyone involved, make sure you ask lots of questions, make sure everyone's on board, because the goal is for everyone to work together to tell a really great story.
That's right.
And that starts with choosing your setting and knowing the sort of story you're going for.
Yeah. You know, we in our group, we have a table full of GMs. We literally trade out every time we finish up a scenario of something, usually switching out to some other setting and also some other system. And switching to the next person in line. And every one of us is a GM. And so one of the things I love about the Roll With It system is you can have a table full of GMs and everybody gets to tell part of the story. And that, to me, is just, it's a beautiful thing when it's working like that clockwork that it's meant to behind the scenes of this beautiful story of storytellers. And you just so often don't see those two working in tandem. And that's what Roll With It does well.
Ultimately, we kind of want the system to be invisible. We want it to just facilitate and not obstruct.
Exactly.
But also where it does obstruct, so to speak, to create some interesting moments.
If it's going to show its face, it might as well have a purpose for doing it. And boy, there's nothing quite like an abandonment or an epiphany to make that happen. But that's a different episode.
Cool. This has been Season 1, Episode 2 of the Doc and Krueger Cast, our discussion on choosing a setting for the Roll With It system. I'm Chris.
I'm Doc.
And we'll see you next time. The Doc and Krueger Cast is a production of Doc and Krueger Games, jointly hosted by Adam Doc Bracken and Chris Krueger. The theme music was composed by Nick Krueger. The Roll With It system is available now. You can find it and our other games through our website, docandkrueger.com.